Okay, live stream's on.
Right, welcome back, everybody. Item number 8 now, reports. The first report is 8.1, representation review decision on initial proposal. We have group manager for people in partnership, Janice McDougall. You there?
Yes, I'm there. Kia ora koutou. Greetings from our bubble here in Raumati South. I'm desperately hoping that we get through this paper without incursions from bubble mates. So we'll see how we go. This morning...
Before you start, can we just understand the protocols in which you're going to talk on the report and when you're open for questions? I leave it to your discretion when you are open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My plan is to make some comments by way of introducing the report, and then at the conclusion of those comments, I would be happy to take questions via you.
Cool. Where you go.
Thank you very much. So the purpose of bringing this report to the council today is to to ask you to adopt an initial proposal for consideration as part of the representation review. In doing so, you enable the start of the public consultation process around representation arrangements for at least the next triennium, if not the next 2 triennia. Before introducing the content of the paper, I would just like to note that that staff do intend to table for councillors some amendments to several recommendations that are included in the report. I have provided these to councillors ahead of time. It was brought to my attention that several of the recommendations could be interpreted in ways that we're perhaps adding to some of the concern around where this process is currently at and what this stage represents. The first being recommendation 2, which seems to imply that councillors would today be making a decision to abolish community boards. That is certainly not the case. That is poorly worded. That is not something that could happen at this stage of the process, and we have proposed some amended wording to clarify that. Also, recommendation 3, it was highlighted that through a poor choice of tense, we are again in that recommendation perhaps implying that there is a degree of this being a fait accompli. So we have proposed an amendment to that to hopefully clarify that. Those are important changes to make in our opinion. So, to move on and introduce the content of this paper, the initial proposal that you are being asked to adopt comes as a result of a number of months of work to explore potential options for representation for Kapiti for the next few years. You will be aware that over the last several months, councillors have had several sessions with staff to understand the outcome of the initial engagement and research stage of the process, and to explore options for representation that reflect the community voice reflected through that process. As is noted in the paper, this representation review is happening in the context of significant change within our sector and within the local government environment. It is also happening at a time of change within our district, and although change has been fairly well constant for Kapiti for many years now, there has not been the same degree of change in the representation arrangements. The existing representation arrangements have existed largely for nearly 20 years now, and in that sense, there is some significant change proposed in the initial proposal that you have been asked to consider today. You will be aware that council staff presented 4 options that, after exploration of a number of options, appeared to be the 4 most appropriate in balancing the legislative requirements that representation arrangements need to meet, and those are set in legislation and overseen by the Local Government Commission. So best in terms of balancing that alongside the community feedback received as part of the engagement and research process. Councillors provided staff with a steer on progressing a modified version of one of those options to work up for consideration as part of the initial proposal. I'd like to make some brief comments around the community engagement and research process. I want to be clear that this is not consultation. Consultation is the process that starts once you have adopted your initial proposal. The community engagement and research process, the preliminary research and engagement process, as you may have heard it called, is based on a robust design research methodology. And I hear the concerns that have been raised about that methodology through public speaking time today. And in response, I would just like to note that there is a specific discipline around design research that is different to other forms of research, including market research. And we have worked with specialists in this area. Empathy Design and Emma Saunders have a significant background working in this space, and also previous experience working in local government. We've also been advised along the way by Dale Ofsowski from Election Services, who provides technical advice to make sure that we are doing our best to comply with the Local Government Commission requirements as we go through this process. I think it's important to note that what the starting point for a representation review is. You may have heard us referring both in briefings and in paperwork to the need to take a blank sheet of paper approach to this. And that phrase really reflects the requirements that the LGC sets down, that council should start by considering their communities of interest first and foremost. Once they have understood the communities of interest within their district or city, they then need to look at what options for representation will provide the most fair and effective representation for those groups. And there are specific requirements that need to be met around fair and effective representation, and these are detailed in the paper. I've also heard through public speaking today and in conversation with councillors some significant concerns around how robust a consultation exercise on this initial proposal might be during lockdown. Obviously, there's a degree of uncertainty about what the next few weeks will hold for us and the potential impact that that will have on our consultation exercise. But I think it's important at this stage to note that there has been no change to the statutory deadlines that all of the 44 councils doing representation reviews in this cycle must meet. We are one of 15 councils that is intending to adopt its initial proposal either this week or very early next week before the statutory deadline of the 7th of September for having that job done. The advice we've received from the Local Government Commission is that there is going to be no change to the statutory deadlines, and certainly the legislative arrangements that the government has put in place to enable decision making to continue while we are in lockdown periods, they certainly do allow for this decision to be made today. And the advice is that consultation arrangements and practices can continue in a non-contact way. So if we are in lockdown of some kind, either at level 4 or level 3, and actually even if we are at alert level 2 for any point during the consultation period, there will be some implications. There will be no in-person consultation activity. It will be, we will not be able to receive hard copy submissions at our service centres and libraries at alert levels 3 and 4. We will potentially also have challenges around some of the targeted efforts to draw attention to the consultation exercise in some of the streets that are impacted by some of the boundary decisions. Staff are obviously working on options for how we can maximise as much as possible the consultation opportunity in a lockdown environment. It may well be that we need to look to local newspapers to play a slightly different role in terms of submissions than what we would at other times. We really do await the outcome of the alert level decision that the government will make tomorrow before deciding on next steps, but it's certainly something that we will intend to explore with the editorial committee at a meeting tomorrow. So I think that's probably sufficient from me by way of introduction, just to echo the point that today is when the consultation, I guess today's decision is about enabling broader consultation on this option to start. And I'm happy to take any questions through you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Hands up. Councillor Holbrook.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. There were a number of questions that were raised during public speaking time around the consultation. I'm just checking in with any submitters that might still be in the room. Do they feel like those questions have been answered? I'm just aware that this is the time when we were going to be responding to public speaking time.
Submitters have left the meeting.
Okay, so there were questions around the consultation, particularly raised by Tina Pope. And one of those has been reiterated to me in an email around sampling and ensuring that we heard a range of submitters from different demographics and from across the district, and that this was able to inform this part of the consultation as a representative group. Could you comment on that, please?
Certainly. I think that that many of those questions or concerns in relation to the methodology or the robustness of the research and engagement phase are making potentially some assumptions about the purpose of that work and also how it was conducted. So the purpose of the preliminary research and engagement phase was not consultation. The purpose of it was to seek feedback and information from our communities to inform the development of options put to council for consideration in selecting the initial proposal. And I think being very clear about that terminology is very important. The design research approach, which, as I said by way of introduction, is different to other research methodologies, including market research, was selected as a way of trying to understand the context in which our members of our community operate, and to find an indirect way to understand their needs and expectations of representation, recognising that if we were asking direct questions, many of them would not have the direct knowledge or experience of working within our representation structures to be able to answer in an informed way. A really important part of a design research approach, or the benefit of a design research approach, is that you are able to build a picture of the needs and expectations of a range of people in your community, not just the people that you hear from most often because they are able to use the existing structures or mechanisms that you have in place. In terms of whether or not the sample was statistically representative of every demographic across the district, the answer would be no. If you were using our residents' opinion survey, a piece of market research as a comparison, where that is carefully managed to ensure that it is a direct statistical representation of the community. This piece of research was not like that. However, absolutely, the makeup of our communities here in Kapiti was reflected in the selection of the people that were spoken to for the research activities in particular. Obviously, the engagement activities were more self-selecting, and that it was a survey that people could fill in. People could make a choice to provide feedback at a market pop-up. They could make a choice to participate at a community information session. But for the research-driven activities, yes, there was definitely a focus on trying to reflect a range of different community perspectives by selecting people from different walks of life.
Thank you for that answer. So I've got a follow-up question.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So for the next part of this consultation, will we be then aiming to ensure that we have views from a range of demographics, communities of interest, geographic locations? How will we be ensuring that we get that range of feedback through this next phase? Or are we going to be ensuring that? How important is that, and how do we plan to go about that?
So the consultation exercise is open to anybody and everybody. So in that sense, it's quite different to the research activities where we were recruiting and selecting individuals to participate. As we do with any consultation exercise, formal consultation exercise within council, we will be using a range of mechanisms to build awareness of the consultation exercise and to make sure that as many people as possible are aware of the opportunity to give feedback on this. We will certainly be trying to learn information about the people that are choosing to submit so that we can start to build a picture of the type of people that we have heard from, and we will use as many of our networks as possible to promote the opportunity, but it won't be targeted in that we won't be selecting particular groups of people to hear from as part of this process.
And so the next stage is going to look quite different to this one, and I think there might be an opportunity then to address some of the concerns in terms of the feedback that were raised today by community boards. So certainly an opportunity and a discussion and a process to go through there, I think.
Yes, by its nature, consultation is different.
Thank you. I've got Kathy Spies, then Councillor Coates.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Just a couple of questions, and I'll take one at a time. This might not be important to others, but it's important to the Parapaluma Raumati Community Board. With the significance policy, it's in the paper, it states that it is of medium significance. I would have thought that democracy was an underlying principle of the significance and engagement policy. I'm wondering why it's not of high significance.
I think that I agree from a personal perspective that democracy is one of the most important things and the reason for local government to be here. However, in terms of the specific thresholds within our significance and engagement policy, it doesn't reach those sort of definitions or thresholds of significance, which are quite specific to financial matters and council's asset base and that kind of thing. So significant as described or defined by the policy is different to significant as you or I might perceive it, unfortunately.
Thank you. Right. My second question, I just want to talk a little bit about barriers, which has given me a bit of angst. I cannot see how there are any barriers between the community boards and councillors, because any person in the community is quite able to pick up a phone at any point in time and get in contact with either community board members or councillors. Now, there's also talk in the paper about setting up hubs, and my feeling is that the expectation is that the people in the residents, people in the community will need to go to the hubs. Now, our community board, we've gone out to the people, and the only way really I contend to engage with our communities is actually to go out into your communities.
Kathy Spies, you need to shape your query as a question, because some of the stuff that you're raising, you can raise it during debate time. You've got the opportunity there.
Yeah, I've got something to debate. Yeah, if you just be patient with me, Mr. Mayor, I have got a question at the end of it. Thank you. and when you're talking about barriers, so I can't see any barriers there. But in the last couple of months, and this is, staff are exceptional, and this is not talking about anybody personally, I'm talking about the barriers. And I just wanted your thoughts on this. The community board granted an individual in our community some fundings for a project in our community. Now, I've been trying to engage with staff since the 9th of June with no success. So my question really is, I don't see the barriers between the residents in our community, the community board and the councillors, but just recently I've been coming up with what one might term as a barrier, trying to get 5 minutes staff. Thank you. It's my question.
So in terms of barriers, what the findings of the community engagement and research process indicated was that there are barriers to participation in local democracy kind of inherent in the system, that the structures, the rules, the inaccessibility of some of the meeting processes and other technical aspects of local government create barriers for some people to get involved. That was one of the findings from the research. The research also suggested that because many of the structures or processes that create those barriers apply both to council and community boards, that then meant that those barriers were in place likely for community boards as well as for council, which then contributed to the perception that potentially it is the same group of people having their voices heard through community boards as are having their voices heard through council or by council. If you accept the findings around barriers, then it would suggest that the people that are able to break through those barriers to work or to be heard by council are also able to break through and break through those barriers to be heard by community boards. So therein comes the concern that community boards provide another vehicle for the voices of people who are already being heard by council to be heard. They're not necessarily providing new voices. It's my attempt to explain barriers and the very many ways that it's dealt with in the research. In terms of hubs and your comments, though, I think what your question was, how could a hub be better than elected members getting out and about if it required the community to come to the hub? I guess what I would say is we have identified that one thing that would be necessary to support the proposed model would be a landing place for elected members within communities. There certainly there is not a suggestion that that suddenly all community has to come to that landing place, and absolutely we would need to work through with both councillors and community what would work in terms of how elected members can how councillors can be more actively involved and connected to communities. So there is no fixed plan there.
Thank you. It's just that when local governments were set up,
hold on, Kathy. Have you got another question?
Well, the question is really, so Janice, what you are saying is, do not only the community boards and councillors need to be rejigged, then council also needs to look at itself and change the way they do things as well.
Yes, absolutely. That's obviously an ongoing work on for us as an organisation, but definitely the way that council, the organisation, connects with the community and provides opportunities for the community to influence the work of the organisation gets looked at as part of this picture. But what is on the table today is a proposal around representation arrangements, which is one part of that picture.
Thank you.
Right, Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've just got some questions that have come through from members of the public and also from some of the public speakers. So although I think some of it is answered in the report, I think for the benefit of those who may be watching the live streaming it is helpful to still ask those questions. One of them specifically around the Waikanai issue. Obviously, we've currently got a Waikanai ward. What is stopping us from continuing to have that Waikanai ward? And it then that goes on to a following question, which refers to around having two options. What's stopping us going out with two options instead of one?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first. The legislation requires that the council adopts one initial proposal to put out to consultation. So the council is not able to put multiple options out for consultation at this stage of the process. It can put out one option. In terms of Waikanai, the major barrier to, or the barrier to the Waikanai ward remaining a ward largely as it currently is the degree to which it does not comply with the plus or minus 10% rule. The plus or minus 10% rule is the formula to ensure fair representation, i.e. that the councillors need to represent about the same number of people, plus or minus 10% of is the range to ensure fair representation. And as has been discussed in public speaking time, under the current structure, the Waikanai ward is quite significantly non-compliant with the plus or minus 10% rule. Based on population growth since the last representation review, would be even more non-compliant if a Waikanai ward similar to what currently exists were to be included. And although the plus or minus 10% rule is not the predominant factor for consideration, communities of interest and not splitting communities of interest is important, a non-compliance of more than 25% would be considered significant. And in fact, the Waikanai ward boundaries, with the northern boundary of the Waikanai ward, was one of the areas that the Local Government Commission specifically asked us to look into as part of this representation review. The other point that they made and asked us to consider with this representation review was taking a more comprehensive approach to understanding the communities of interest and working with the community to inform the development of options.
Thank you. So that goes into my next question, which I think you've partly covered, but why the status quo is not an option, given that the Local Government Commission in its previous determination allowed for the variation of the plus or minus 10%. So what's stopping us from going out with the status quo?
So in accepting it as part of its determination last time, the Local Government Commission specifically highlighted that we would need to consider ways to address that for future options. I think, does that answer your question? Oh, no, your question was around starting with a blank sheet of paper, wasn't it? So
no, it was about whether the status quo is an option.
So we, in terms of the degree of non-compliance for the Waikanai ward having increased further, we've looked at whether minor boundary or whether boundary changes could be made to address that, to bring that level of non-compliance down to a point where it may be acceptable. We tried many different options and could not make that work. It is the staff view that a Waikanai ward option similar to what we have now is just not possible within the legislative requirements around the representation review.
Thanks. I've just got two more quick questions. There'd been some comment through the public speaking around the lack of opportunity for community board members to be involved in the process. Could you outline what was made available for community boards to feed into the process, and also why they were not at the or how the process is set out in terms of what they are at and what they're not at?
So there were multiple opportunities for community boards to participate in the preliminary research and engagement process. There have been several briefings specifically for community boards along the way, to help them, I guess, to seek their views, to contribute to the process, but also to present the initial research findings to community board members, and to, through the use of workshops around scenarios, gain some feedback from community board members to inform the development of the options. It is the council that has the decision-making role when it comes to representation reviews. So there have been, there were two workshops, I think, 3 workshops maybe. One, to understand the research findings in more detail, and 2, to explore options that were only for councillors. And that is a fairly, that's not an unusual practice for council, to have time to develop options without the public or community board chairs in the room.
Okay, last question, and Councillor Holbrook has covered this, but I think it's an important one just to get a reassurance. There's been a lot of comment around the work that Empathy have done around providing the information that councillors have assisted us in making the proposed proposal that we have today. How can you reassure councillors that we can rely on that information in terms of being robust?
You can rely on that information being robust because it was developed with a robust design research methodology. You can have confidence because the team at Empathy Design, in particular Emma Saunders, who led the efforts for this project, has a significant background in this space, significant qualifications, significant experience, and an understanding of the local government environment. We are not the only council that they have worked with over time. The other piece that I think you can have confidence in is that design research as part of an overall design thinking approach is increasingly becoming a part of how many private sector organisations, but more specifically how public sector organisations are developing their services, activities and facilities to better meet the needs of their communities. This is a discipline that is increasingly becoming a part of the way of doing things within local government. You can look to quite significant initiatives such as the Southern Initiative in Auckland, where a number of central government, local government and community organisations work together to redesign community services and activities. The director of that project, who is a general manager at Auckland Council, is a member of the local government review panel that's currently working its way around the country. I think that gives you confidence that the approach that has been taken here is appropriate for the environment that we work in here in local government in Kapiti.
Okay, thanks, Dennis.
Right, Councillor Pravanov.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Janice, for your presentation and answering the number of questions that you've had. So I've got 2 or 3 questions. My first one relates to the research that was done before the briefings that councillors had. So that research basically framed the direction that that we have gone in. You also made the comment that that research was not a good representation of the district. So I asked the question, particularly when a number of those people had no engagement with elected members. So I asked the question again, how can you assure councillors that that process was robust and directed us in the right direction in terms of the structure that we now have on the table?
To answer your first question, yes, the engagement and research activities and the feedback and the insights that were generated from that informed the development of a set of design principles that were then used to explore options for representation arrangements. I don't believe I said that that the research and the people that were spoken to through the engagement and research was not a good representation of the district. I believe what I said was that unlike market research, such as our residents' opinion survey, where there is a focus on trying to get a fairly exact representative sample of all of the significant demographics in the district, a design research approach is not quite as specific as that. But I did say to councillors that it was important that we tried to reflect a range of different community people, essentially, different community members with different interests. So I think that's an important point of clarification. In terms of why you can have confidence in this, I think my answer to Councillor Coots's questions probably is enough on that, but absolutely we believe that this has been a robust process and we have worked with technical experts to make it so.
Thank you. So I have a further question. Councillor Coots actually asked in terms of why we only have one option on the table. But I just want to follow up on that. So in point 84 of the report today, it says that the final council decision approving initial proposal is on the table, but there's nothing in the report that talks about if basically the community reject this proposal. And we haven't seen the survey that's going out with this consultation or how it's going to be framed, and I suppose I just want to be assured that people are going to be informed that that even though this is one option on the table, I'd like to think that there may be some big changes to this further down the line, hearing what we're hearing from our community. So just to summarise my question, can you please provide some information on what happens if the communities reject the proposal that is going out for consultation?
So just in terms of answering that question, and then I will come back around to your question around consultation questions. Councillors are able to, will consider the feedback from the consultation exercise and are able to make changes to the initial proposal to reflect that community feedback. That is the purpose of a consultation exercise, to test this proposal with the community, and absolutely, if there are concerns raised on the community, the councillors certainly have the ability to make changes to reflect that. In terms of the consultation questions, that will form part of the consultation material, and I note that there's a recommendation in the report to establish an editorial subcommittee to work with staff to finalise that material over the coming days.
Thank you. So my last question relates to, obviously there's been quite a lot of conversations around Waikanae, and obviously I'm the Waikanae Ward councillor. You made the comment that having a Waikanae Ward isn't workable because of the potential population growth. Just to clarify, please, it's my understanding that this representation review is based solely on the current population, not on projections of population growth. Can you make comments on that, please?
I was referring to population growth that had occurred since the last representation review, not population growth that might occur in the future. So yes, you are correct that the representation review can only be based on what the situation is currently. We can't imagine what the future might look like and take that into account to any great degree.
Thank you.
Holly Eads.
Kia ora, thank you, Janice. I have quite a few questions. The first one is that you note that the empathy approach has robust methodologies, and agree that the design of that research has influenced the decision-making of councillors to come to this initial proposal. we can't see any proof of that methodology. I don't know if councillors have been provided with proof of that methodology, but currently we are just supposed to take your word for it, which I think at this point in time isn't good enough. And the assumptions that are in that document have led to the removal of community boards, and it's only mentioned twice in that document. Could you please clarify what those assumptions are based on? What does many and most mean?
In terms of methodologies, the methodology is outlined in the report from Empathy Design. In terms of more detail around how Empathy Design went about achieving that process, that is a matter that is potentially, I guess, intellectual property for Empathy Design. We are meeting with the researcher in the next couple of days to see what other information we can provide in more detail about that methodology to try and address some of the concerns that have been raised. But I think it is important to note that we hire experts to do things that we cannot do ourselves. And in doing so, we put trust in them and their expertise to follow a methodology that can give us robust information. And certainly my sense from having worked with Empathy Design on this project is that they set incredibly high standards for themselves. And if they had any concerns about the robustness of the information, it wouldn't be put forward. In fact, we ended up undertaking additional interviews, more than what we had more than what we had intended, to ensure that a robust picture could be developed. So I suspect that I'm not going to be able to provide you today with a level of information that reassures you around the methodology. I guess I'm simply saying I think we put our trust in experts across the council business to do work that we can't, and this is no different to engaging experts to help us with bridge design or to develop a park or that kind of thing.
Well, that leads to my next question, which is when you talked about that the initial approach was to understand the communities of interest. I think you'll notice that Paikakariki is barely mentioned in the whole document. And basically what it says is that it was hard to engage with people in Paikakariki because we were also engaged. And I know this from attending those workshops, that there was one person who attended the community workshop, and then Andrea Healy explained to us in one of our community board workshops that no, they couldn't actually contact anybody in Paikakariki. This is why it's important, really important, to have the demographics. I've asked for those demographics and it's gone through an OIA process, which as an elected member, I don't think is actually good enough. I mean, anyone's details can be redacted. This is a piece of research. And we need to know that to make sure that our community has been fairly represented and the views of our community have been fairly represented. And right now, we have no evidence, zero evidence to base that on.
I'm conscious that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to get into debate with you about that. But was there a question underneath that?
Why is it not supplied? Why is that not supplied? And why does a community board member have to, or any elected member, have to go through an OIA process in order to have what should be standard procedure in a research document?
So I will be guided by the design research experts that we've worked with about what is standard for inclusion in a feedback document for a piece of design research and engagement. I guess that's my first response. Secondly, in terms of information requests being logged as part of our official information system, we have received a number of official information, of requests for information in relation to the representation review, both from community boards and from members of the public in recent days. The team that's working on the representation review at the moment is also as well as supporting this decision-making process with councillors today, it is the same group of people that are preparing the consultation material and getting ready for consultation, working in an environment where everybody is a little bit topsy-turvy because we're all working from desire that lies behind those inquiries and the need to be able to answer them as quickly as we can. However, we'll need to do that in and amongst the other urgent work that has to happen too. So logging them as OIRs ensures they don't get lost, and we will work on getting responses to those questions as quickly as we can in and amongst the other competing priorities we have now.
Can I get an assurance that the information that's needed would be available through the public consultation process? I mean, I think that's critical.
So we will work to answer this as quickly as we can. I don't know how long that will take. It depends on the queries, not all of which I've got visibility of yet. But yes, absolutely, we will provide answers in time to inform people's thinking as part of the consultation process. Just to add, some of the questions that have been asked, we don't hold that information. We are needing to talk with our suppliers about whether or not they are willing to provide that information. That in itself takes some time.
Okay, thank you for that. And I've just got a few more points, but you talked about the barriers into engagement, and that community boards are seen to be amplifying voices already in the room. And the proposed option states that community groups would step up or in and out for particular projects. I'd just like you to know that all of the community groups in Paikakiriki currently have a relationship with the Paikakiriki Community Board, and I'm sure I speak for many boards in this sense. So what you're hearing from, you'll hear from the same voices. There's no proof, or that's a huge assumption that they'd want to, but where is your proof that that will create more diversity? It's not relevant. I can't see it in the report.
So the purpose of the report is to highlight the findings of the research.
Sorry, I should say I don't see it in the recommendations. I don't see it in the recommendations. No, I don't see any proof of that.
I don't think there's a question there.
Okay. Oh, sorry. And lastly, just on engagement of community boards, we would like to know why you semi-answered it there, but do you think that 1 day's notice for an important briefing on the outcome of this proposal is sufficient time for community board members who are primarily voluntary and most work jobs is enough time in order for us to be able to make a briefing about this proposal? Do you think that was long enough?
It was more than 1 day's notice. It was definitely more than 1 day's notice.
It did not have, and do you think that not having any context around it was appropriate given the severity of and the weight of the decision that was being made?
I think that we did our best to make sure that it was clear that there was an opportunity to be updated on progress around the representation review within the confidentiality that applied to that process at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Angela Boswell.
Thank you. Many of my questions have already been asked and answered, but I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity around the process. This is not an unusual process in terms of going out to community to engage and get a bit of research through our advisory groups, through different members of the community, because we do the same thing with our annual plan, forming opinions on that, and also our long-term plan. Can you just clarify that, please?
I would agree that it is not unusual in that sense. We use a range of different techniques to get, to understand the needs and aspirations and views and opinions of our community to inform various pieces of work. What I would say is different, and that this is a positive difference, is that there was a research methodology basis underlying not just the research activities here, but the engagement activities as well. So the way that most of the engagement activities were framed was potentially more robust well, not robust. Robust is probably not the right word, but there was a different, I guess, technical basis to that engagement activity that I think in this instance gives us a quality of information that we should be really pleased by.
Thank you. I just have a further question around the timeframes. There's been a bit of talk about deadlines and that we can't move them. But if we can't move the deadlines, can we remove the penalties for not meeting those deadlines? I know in other government departments right now, they can't move deadlines, but they can definitely lift any penalties that would be posed against us or put against our record.
In this instance, that appears not to be the case. I have spoken with the Local Government Commission, and I believe the Mayor has as well this week. And the advice has been that the statutory timeframes relating to the representation review remain in place. And that is because there are provisions in place to enable decision making to continue. There is, in a lockdown environment, there is nothing preventing you as a council from adopting your initial proposal. And moving consultation activities online is the advice that councils have in terms of how they can continue with consultation activities in lockdown. The key thing for us is that if the statutory deadlines are not shifted, there are consequences for this council, or potential consequences for this council in not meeting them. The process that has been followed could be amenable to judicial review if the council fails to meet the statutory deadlines. In terms of the Local Government Commission, the Local Government Commission's role is more than just sort of having oversight of a process. They have a role in helping determine representation arrangements, and if this council chose not to carry out the steps that it needs to determine representation arrangements, then the Local Government Commission may well step in to determine them for us.
Okay, and just lastly, just in, in terms of the consultation documents and so forth being published, you've mentioned that we can't go out and receive written documentation. My concern is if we also rely on newspapers, I'm not sure that newspapers have been printed in level 4. So that is another concern in terms of targeting people that aren't perhaps online and so forth.
Yeah, so that really is a difficult space for us and for other councils. The local newspaper, Kapiti News, is continuing to publish at lockdown. It is not delivered directly to people's letterboxes, but it is made available at places that people are already going to for essential services. So they are making copies of the paper available at supermarkets and Foursquares and service stations and that kind of thing. So one of the options that we could look at, and the team is actively looking into, is whether or not the consultation material could be published largely in its entirety in a supplement in the newspaper with a submission form included as part of that. And we could then look at having some kind of boxes or receptacles in the places where the paper is available from, so that when people were out doing their shopping, they could pick up a copy of the paper, and then if they wanted to use the submission form within the paper, they could then drop it back in the box next time they go to do their shopping or to get their petrol or whatever it might be. That's probably the other option that we could look at, is some kind of free post option where people can have a submission form within the paper that they can then post back to us. There are potentially some challenges around that in terms of the postal delivery. So we're looking into all of those things. We appreciate that they are not ideal and definitely not as good as some of the options that we would have, but we will just need to do our best in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in the next few weeks. We're also looking at whether there is the option for people to phone in a submission, essentially. So if they are not digitally capable, then if they were able to read the consultation material in the paper and see a series of consultation questions, is there an option for them actually to phone us and to have somebody take down their submission and do it that way? So those are the sorts of things we're looking at.
It's great. Thank you for that clarity, because from your previous message, I understood that you weren't going to be taking handwritten documentation just over these levels. So thanks for that.
Right. Can I have James Westbury?
I've got a couple of questions. Can you just help me understand, Janice, with regards to the shortlisting of the options, I can't find any documentation to say how the councillors were involved in the shortlisting in a council meeting. Can you just did that process go through a formal council meeting to shortlist the options?
They weren't involved in a shortlisting meeting as such. We were able to present options to councillors by way of a briefing, and they were able to give us a steer on how to continue to develop options for them to be able to make a decision on today in terms of adopting their initial proposal.
So correct me if I'm wrong, a briefing is not a place to make a decision, yes?
That is correct, but the council did not make a decision in the briefing. They make the decision today.
No, you've do experts, in your opinion, ever get it wrong?
What kind of question is that?
Have you been advised by experts where they've got it wrong?
With respect, I don't believe that's an appropriate question for me to answer.
It's an entirely appropriate question because you're relying on experts.
Experts get it wrong all the time. I have confidence that our experts have got it right.
No, thank you. A couple more questions. Have officers basically influenced or directed some of the recommendations in any of the papers?
I think...
Or correspondence?
I think,
Guru, that's a legitimate question.
Hold on, mate. I'm not going to allow that question.
How?
Because the answer is obvious, no.
No. So if I did an OAA and I actually looked for any email communication that might describe or influence the outcome of this review, would I not find it?
Well,
can you provide me with assurance?
You can go, for a start, it depends on how you define that influence.
No, well, it's a genuine question, Guru.
Well, okay then. I'll ask Janice to answer and let's see what the answer is.
So officers put a range of options on the table for councillors to consider. Councillors gave a steer on which options they wanted further work on, and that has resulted in the initial proposal that councillors have been asked to make a decision on today.
Thank you.
Right. Martin Holiday.
Hello, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, as Angela said, a lot of my questions have been answered, but I do have some. Look, I just wanted some clarity around the community boards again, as everyone else, but this proposal has them as being not included. If through the consultation process and subsequent decision-making, it is decided to include or have them, what's the process to enable that decision?
So the council would give direction to officers to amend the final proposal that is put before councillors in November for adoption.
That simple. Okay. Question 2, will the consultation document that goes out specifically, could it, that's going out, could it specifically ask for views on community boards? Will it have questions that are specifically geared or to encourage feedback around community boards?
The consultation questions will touch on a range of aspects of the proposal. I'm not sure that there is something that specifically says, do you think community boards are a good idea or not? But that's a conversation we could have with the editorial committee tomorrow in terms of agreeing the questions and the shape of the consultation material.
That would be much appreciated. I personally think that's an important question to be in there. With regards to talking to levels 3 and 4, issues around comms and consultation, I'm just curious, will social media be considered or be used as a medium for consultation as well?
Absolutely. So I don't know about a medium for consultation, but certainly as a way of ensuring that we have as much visibility as possible of the consultation exercise. So as is the case with most of our consultation activities, there is a large focus on online engagement anyway, irrespective of the alert levels. So our engagement HQ portal will be active and people will be able to engage and learn about the process and provide their feedback via that. Absolutely, we'll be using all of our social media channels to promote the opportunities to give feedback via the consultation process, and we'll probably look at geo-targeted ads and other bits and pieces as a way of trying to get the message into particular parts of the district where we want to ensure that there's visibility of it. So as I said in some of my earlier comments, areas such as the streets in and around boundary lines, we probably can't geo-target to a street level, but we'll do our best to geo-target into towns, or if we can get to neighbourhoods, so be it. Social media, we will use our own social media channels, and of course we expect that there will be commentary there, but as is the case with other consultation exercises, we will be directing people to the formal submissions process to enable them to answer as many of the questions as possible, to give us the most robust, possible body of evidence coming out of the consultation exercise.
Thank you. In the recommendations, it confirms that because of the plus or minus rule with regards to the Northern Ward, that no matter what happens, this will be automatically referred to the Local Government Commission. So we're already going to the Local Government Commission anyway. So it'll just be in regards to what specifically needs to be discussed, that being one of potential more than one topics that they could maybe have to make a determination on.
It is correct that if the final proposal includes the Northern Ward as it currently stands, yes, because it does not comply with the plus or minus 10% rule, then the LGC will be required to make a final determination on our representation arrangements. Yeah.
And just look, lastly, it's just a little bit out of left field. It's just because we're in the public arena, I wanted some clarity with regards to the Maori Ward. Now, that was done, or the decision around the Maori Ward was done as part of the lead up to this review, and it's not part of this review. Is that correct?
That's correct. That decisions around Māori wards need to be made prior to work starting on the representation review, so that the representation review can allow for a Māori ward if there is a decision to establish one. So that decision was made initially in October last year. Following some legislative change by the government this year, there was an opportunity to reconsider that decision, and several months ago, based on feedback from our iwi partners, the council resolved not to establish a Māori ward this time. And the reason that our iwi partners provided in terms of why they didn't support it was that they wanted the focus to be on partnership between mana whenua and the council, as opposed to representation arrangements.
So just clarifying, is there any way that that discussion about the Māori ward can be brought back into the process, say via resolution, or are we now past that stage?
We are past that stage.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Chris Betts.
Sorry.
That's all right. Okay, done it. What happens if the proposal is fully rejected by the councillors at the end of the consultation?
The council is required to notify a final proposal. So they can make changes to that proposal on the basis of the feedback that is received through the consultation exercise, but they can't not resolve anything at the end of that process.
Does it mean totally rewriting it?
I believe that the LGC would be looking to make sure that the changes that were being made were reflective of the feedback expressed by the community as part of the consultation.
Thanks.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Guru. Just through you, I wonder if we could elaborate further on the community grants process. There's one paragraph there. If you could provide some confidence about how this process could remain grounded firmly in the community.
There would be a range of options for how community grant processes could continue to be strongly grounded in the community. So definitely in the absence of community boards, there would need to be a new mechanism established for distributing community grants. We do know that they have a really important role to play within communities in terms of providing access to a range of opportunities that people might not otherwise have. We'd need to look at, I guess, work with communities to explore in more detail what the options would be. It would probably be unhelpful if council decided by itself what it thought would work. However, some of the options that have been mooted so far include an expanded process via the grants allocation subcommittee that already exists. And I imagine that we would need to look at how we have community members from local communities co-opted onto that committee or become members of that committee for the purposes of local community grants, if that was the option. And that's certainly similar to how it works for other specific grants programs within that the grants allocation subcommittee covers. So for the creative communities grants or the community grants programs, they both have community representation on the committee for the purposes of those grant programs. There are other options that we could look at in terms of whether there are existing structures within communities that could take on the role of administering grants. We could look at whether there was a council staff-led process working alongside community groups to look at that. Many things are possible. And certainly there would be time to work through those details before any changes that impacted grants programs would be made.
Thank you. A couple further questions, Guru, if you allow me. Councillor Halliday made some good questions about consultation. So I just want to clarify, there's no legislative prohibition about us asking open-ended questions so that we can receive a wide variety of views. They don't have to be, and this is a question specifically targeted at the current proposal, or can they be wide enough to allow people to feed in their views? I just want to be very clear about this.
So there are no specific requirements about what questions we should ask and how we should ask them as part of the consultation. So that's where best practice in terms of how to frame questions to get the most usable information through a consultation exercise really becomes important at that point. In general, open-ended questions worded very carefully can sometimes deliver better information than specific questions that rely on people already having knowledge, but that's definitely something that we will work through with the editorial committee. The other piece that I think is relevant here is that we need to look at how the consultation questions and the feedback that they generate speaks to the previous community feedback already received as well. So making sure that there can be some connections drawn between two distinct parts of a process.
Thank you. And just following on from that, when we receive that feedback, we're going to have there is scheduled enough time for councillors to be able to work through all the different issues that might be raised?
Absolutely. So there will be a hearings process for councillors to be able to hear in person from any submitters that request to speak to you in person, and you will have opportunities to question those submitters to understand more. We then have several weeks worth of time where there are at the moment, I think, several sessions booked with councillors, and we can certainly increase the number of sessions with councillors to work through that feedback. We do have some restrictions around, how much time there is to work through that process, and that there is a legislative requirement for us to for the council to publicly notify its final proposal within 6 weeks of having closed submissions. And there is also a date by which that has to happen. So it's within 6 weeks by a particular date. So it's going to be a busy time for everybody in that period, but certainly whatever opportunities councillors need to work through that feedback, we're able to support them.
And can I just check, what role will community boards have in working through that feedback and feeding back to councillors?
So this is ultimately the initial proposal is, and the final proposal are council decisions, and staff will be guided by councillors as to how you would like to involve community boards in your decision-making process.
And one final question, Mr. Mayor, this is probably an explosive one. I certainly heard what's felt like a legal threat being lobbed at us if we make the wrong decision. What is council staff's advice around statements like that?
I think we've got Tim Power on the call, so I should probably throw to him to give you the right kind of advice on legal matters.
Excellent sidestepping. That's my last question.
Mr. Bowles, could you start by framing your understanding of the question?
Shall I state it again, Mr. Mayor?
Do that.
So one of the things, Mr. Powers, that we heard today was that there could be the threat of legal action if we don't make the right decision. So I'd just like to hear what council staff, and particularly someone with a legal expertise, has to say about that particular statement and how we should weight that.
Is Mr. Powers here, or are we calling him?
Tim, I think you've muted your microphone. Could you unmute your microphone?
Can I just check whether we're being charged for the silence, Mr. Mayor?
To me, it looks like Mr. Powers is having some issues connecting his microphone.
Well, can we go on to Sophie Hanford and then we come back to Tim? Sophie.
Cool, kia ora. Most of my questions have already been answered, but through you, Mr. Mayor, just a couple more. I also had some questions about the consultation process and the use of newspapers and social media and all of that, but that's all been answered, and also the questions around how we potentially amend this proposal into a final representation arrangement, but that's all been covered off as well. My question then, following on from those questions having already been answered, is whether community boards will be able to comment on the consultation documents before they are finalised, and what kind of oversight will councillors who aren't on that kind of drafting group be able to have too, or is it solely just those people who will have access to that before it's released to the public for consultation?
Well, the recommendation that we have proposed is that the council establish an editorial subcommittee of 3 councillors to work with staff to finalise that material. That's a fairly standard part of that's a fairly standard practice for us. It's akin to what happens with long-term plans and annual plans and that kind of thing. At the moment, we had an envisaged community board involvement in that process.
Is there scope to potentially include involvement of community board members, say the chairs of each board, or is that kind of out of scope?
I think where that has happened in the past, for example, with consultation material around the long-term plan, it's related to specific initiatives within their communities, and it was the I guess the desire to get local input into how that could be framed and expressed that drove that. This is a slightly different situation, but which is why staff hadn't proposed that. Obviously, if we're open to advice from councillors.
having said that, I'm sure that the elected members on the panel are open-minded to have ideas being suggested to them.
Indeed, and I guess the other point that I would note, and I know I risk sounding like one of those pointy-headed bureaucrats when I say this, but we've got we are very tight on timing in terms of finalising our consultation material to then enable us to get it out into the world. And even if we're not having to try and allow for print timeframes for hard copy documents and things like that, we are now having to work on potentially additional items such as newspaper supplements and things like that in more detail than what we had. We've also got a significant amount of work involved in getting all of this information online with quite a small team working on that, and it's the same people that are quite heavily involved in COVID stuff. So if it sounds like I'm emphasising timeframes a bit, it's because we are genuinely under pressure here, hence the proposal to work with a subset of councillors to be able to progress this quickly.
Thank you for that clarity. I just have one more question. How can we expect to hear from people who are not connected now through the consultation process if they're not kind of already engaged in the work of council? How will we? I feel like that kind of has already been fleshed out a little bit through the question around how we'll ensure that this reaches anyone who wants to have their say, but actually seeking out the people who currently our representation model might not be representing, and how those people then feed into something that might better represent their voice.
So we will do our best to reach as many people as we can with the opportunity to participate in the consultation exercise. But as is, I mean, I think potentially we will see some of the findings of the research and engagement phase playing out in terms of the people more likely to engage in this consultation than others. But we will certainly do our best to promote it. But as I've noted earlier, the consultation exercise is largely about creating an opportunity for anybody to participate rather than targeting specific sectors of the community.
Yeah, appreciate you repeating that again. And I guess that's something us councillors can help with too, is sharing all of that around. And yeah.
Indeed. There will be some challenges if this is happening online only. That is without question.
Yeah, cool.
Is Mr. Tim Powers ready?
I think Tim needs someone to repeat the question, please.
Rob, third time round.
Kia ora, Tim, this is a question directly to you because it's been passed over to you. We've had some representations online today that there will be legal challenges. I'm just wondering, what is your advice around making a decision when we are being told that if we don't make the right decision, there'll be a legal challenge? And hopefully you heard the context of where that statement comes from.
Apologies if the signal drops, but my comment would be that there are going to be, there's a potential for legal challenges either way. So if the council doesn't follow the timeframes that are set under legislation, then we are potentially vulnerable to judicial review. And if we make a decision that certain ratepayer groups are unhappy with, then we will also be, that decision could be judicially reviewed as well. My comment would be, as long as we follow a good process, then the potential for judicial review would be reduced, minimised. I think in the current environment, it would be difficult for people to challenge the consultation that we've undertaken and just blame it on lockdown. So, you know, I'm pretty happy with the process that we've followed to date.
Just for clarification, because I asked that question 3 times, I think I said would be a legal challenge when I meant could the third time round. Thank you.
Right. Have I missed anybody from ask questions? No. If that's the case, then we are now looking at item 8.1, the recommendations on page 24. These are the amended ones that have been sent to you all. I'm moving the recommendations 1 to 5. Can I have a seconder? Like I said, I'm moving the recommendations 1 to 5 as amended. Can I have a seconder? Grayson, please.
We have Angela Buswell, Councillor Buswell, seconding
Okay,
that.
Councillor Buswell seconded it, and I now open it for. Let me give a point of intro. Look, this is an interesting part of the process to get the public consultation going. And I think that's where the key debate is going to be, is in the public. And a responsibility for us is to support this so that the wider public, including the community boards, can engage with the process, which is quite challenging. Change is not easy, but by the same token, like for instance, I've always been a firm supporter of community boards. The journey has been difficult, I accept that, but the report that has come in, the research that has been done, even though the methodology has been questioned, has raised some really key issues for us in terms of how we perceive ourselves. There's an old whakatuaki in my country where it says, "Seperti katak di bawah tempurung," which is like a frog under a coconut shell. You only know what you know. I believe that the research methodology has given a view outside, and therefore it has challenged us. And we need to go out into the public to then interface with the public and see, and that's where the robust debate is going to happen. And I know that all of us have an open mind. I've always said that you have an open mind, but not an empty head. So each of us have got preconceived ideas, but we have an open mind to listen to the submissions, to the different views, the passionate views of the local community boards that we've heard. And also the critical part next round is the design that we do in terms of the consultation process under the current COVID civic landscape, if you can call it that. But we have done this before at the last lockdown when we went to the annual plan process, a much more arduous process that we went through under similar sort of situations, a level 4, level 3. So it's not undoable. So we have the capability of managing this. The consultation document design is critical. As I told Councillor Hanford, the panel members will be open for ideas to be given to us as to how we manage and design that. So that's all I need to say. This is a step in the process and very tight time frames, and I ask you all to support this. And now open to debate. Councillor Holbrook.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the community board chairs and members and the representative from Waikanai who happens to be on a community board who came along today to speak to us. And I've heard all those concerns, and I'm sure we all have. The thing is, we are where we're at, and we're under some tight time constraints. That we're not the only council going through this in the country at the moment. There are quite a few of these representation reviews going through at this challenging time, and no one in the country is delaying the process. And we've had that advice from the Local Government Commission that there isn't that flexibility available to us. So I think what's crucial is that this next part of the consultation addresses some of those concerns from the community board chairs and members that have been raised today, and that we really get this next part right. So as a member of that editorial panel, I'd be open to hear from anybody about ideas and any input that they'd like to have. So I think we should make this next part of the process as open, inclusive and effective as we can in this challenging time. So I'll be supporting this today.
Councillor Compton.
Kia ora, thank you, and I really appreciate the kōrero we've had today. As we've gone through this process to get here today, my preferred option was that proposal for the smaller, more geographically targeted walls. I think is option 3 in the paper. And, you know, appreciating that that's not something that's on the table today, I still think that would have been a better option. They would have had the, even if you added district-wide councillors, to get the sort of best of both worlds for this. And it was sort of, I guess, when I was looking at it, I was ambivalent about whether we had community boards in or without that. But as I've thought more about this, and especially with the what we've heard today and over the last few days where there's been a bit of discussion about this online, you know, I've reflected on how our community boards provide that grassroots connection with the community, and they provide invaluable support for us as councillors. Especially, I think it was Margaret put it, in terms of that community intelligence that we might not necessarily get. And when I look at local government reform, that's something that I'm, you know, unapologetically a big advocate for. Specifically, where you look at Auckland, where 8 councils, the 7 city and district councils and the regional council were rolled into the super city, they realised in that process there was still a need for a level of community participation that actually sat below what those original councils were. And that's why you ended up with 21 local boards. So you originally had those 7 city and district councils plus the regional council, and 21 local boards. So it's that layer sitting underneath the governing bodies that previously existed. So there's a real view that you need that more granular level of decision-making, of community engagement and of advocacy. Now, Auckland recently did do a review of their community boards, I think 2018 possibly from memory, and one of the things they found, which I think is somewhat familiar to what some of our experience has been, and I'm sure the community boards probably members feel this too, is that community boards do struggle with their role in part because of around the resourcing of it. And that was something that we looked to address for our long-term plan in terms of the $20,000 for each community board, to help them with their community engagement and to help them to support activities in their communities. So I think, you know, when I look at this, I think that sort of thing, we sort of recognise there was an issue with the resourcing for community boards. And I do question why we're not letting that run to give that a chance before we sort of propose getting rid of them. So I feel that if we lost community boards, that would lose an important part of how council as an organisation connects with our communities. And it's often in a way that we as councillors can't necessarily do so, because as the decision makers, we're sitting there, we're having to be open-minded. We can't necessarily engage in the political debate around these things, even though the reality is we are politicians, but in terms of the framework we operate in, we've got to be very careful about how we do that. And I feel that we'd lose that even with the additional support that's been discussed that could be provided for councillors to engage in the community around those community clinics and community fora and that sort of thing. I guess the other issue that I'm a bit concerned about, and something that Richard Mansell brought up earlier, was around that proposed ward model in here, that a community that makes up roughly a quarter of our population, Waikanai, would face a real risk of not having any direct representation at all within that large central ward under this proposal, and especially with no community board either. And that's literally 1 in 4 people in Kapiti who would be potentially worse off in terms of representation under this proposal, which I think is incredible given that they're already quite significantly underrepresented under our current arrangements. So with all that in mind, I'm not comfortable in this proposal going out as it is today, so I won't be supporting it today.
Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, kia ora. I would just like to kind of, I guess, talk through my own personal views on where we're at right now and where we go moving forward. I would also firstly just like to recognise that there is a lot of mamai about this, and that there are differing views on this across the council table and the community. But I think that's because we all feel so deeply about ensuring effective and fair representation for our people, and that's kind of a good thing, the fact that people are really passionate about this topic, and that we do have different views because we have different kind of perspectives on how our community can be best represented. But I truly believe that our intentions are really, really pure, and hold the community deep and centred in that purpose. I'd also like to acknowledge the kind of sense of grievance that community boards are feeling about the process, and I think we heard that pretty loud and clear this morning. And as Councillor Holbrook said, I think we have a real opportunity to kind of make some of those things right if we can through this next stage of the process. But I think it's important to acknowledge spaces where we could have potentially done better or communicated better, to then recognise what we can do to improve through this next stage. So I will be supporting this initial proposal today, as we know it now goes out to the public, and it will go through a process and a period of public consultation to allow public dialogue and for this to be meaningfully incorporated. And that's something that I'll be really trying to champion through this next stage of the process. I'll also be listening attentively to the Pakikiriki Community Board, being the Pakikiriki Raumati Ward Councillor, and also the Parapara Umu Raumati Ward, to try and really understand what my ward is thinking about this as well. Because it's really important too that my perspective on the final model of representation is not solely based on my view or even the views that we hold around this council table, but instead the views of the wider community, because we are here because of them and for them. Something more like a panel or a kai and catch up sessions, which were less formal, might bring some more people out of their shell to contribute their thoughts and whakaaro who maybe aren't already. And I did actually ask some questions on my Instagram story last night of young people across Kapiti, and the questions that I got back were things along the lines of, well, what are community boards? How does the council work currently? And a lot of what people said was that, a lot of the feedback I got back was that it would be cool if there was something alongside the current model where there were some more informal kai and catch-up sessions, but that doesn't necessarily have to exist in place of community boards, could potentially be alongside. I just believe it's an incredibly important time to be visionary, and an important time to be focusing on the purpose and the why. So why are community boards important? Why do we need them in our community? Why do we need fair and effective representation? And how can that look? And how do we also recognise when things aren't working potentially as well as they possibly could, and look at what changes need to be made, if any. So again, I'm supporting this initial proposal today, as we know it goes through a period and a process of public consultation, and it's important that we allow that public dialogue. And I'm really looking forward to kind of embracing all of what comes back from our community, our diverse community, with an open heart and open ears to receiving all of that in whatever form it might come to us in. Kia ora.
Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, similar views as Sophie. I made a couple of notes down here, and Sophie used the word visionary. From my perspective, we've heard some feedback based through the work that Empathy did. We have our own individual views, all of us as councillors and community board members. And I think the important thing is that what we're doing here today isn't actually about what we think or what we want. It's about listening from the community who elect elected representatives, making the point that some or many of us may not be around, may not even be standing for the next elections or even be around. So it's not about us, it's about the community's representative options they have in terms of engaging with the community. So although I have my own personal views, and I'm sure many of the others involved in this meeting today have their own views, there was that feedback sought through the work that Empathy did. And although the proposal going out in some people's minds may not be ideal or perfect, it simply creates an opportunity for further discussion and kōrero, as others have said. It was interesting, the piece of information that was sent through by Mr. Westbury from Mike Reid, which was quite a good document. And if others haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. And it's important not to cherry pick certain pieces that suit your own, just acknowledging it's important not to pick certain pieces that suit your own narrative. But I think the point at the end was quite well how Mr. Reid put it, in saying that this is not a blank check for community boards in regards to the advice that he's provided. They need to look at how they work and to a degree, and the degree to which they are engaging with their communities in a manner that empowers and enables. They are not little councils. And if they are to have a future, they need to see themselves as part of that community, not its government. Look, I've come up through the community board unintentionally. I never saw myself being in this role full stop, to be honest, let alone being a ward councillor. And I've said in the past that good, well-functioning community boards should and often do make the council's job easier. So, I think there has been a role and a place for community boards, and Paikakariki is probably an outstanding example of how that has been done. And not aside from the work that their other community groups do that they also work with as well. And noting that the option when we go out, or the options available to the community in the feedback, does not preclude having 1 or 2 or 3 community boards selected as an option. The report refers to communities of interest, distinct communities of interest, and Paikakariki and Otaki were specifically identified as so. So, look, I said earlier that there'll be many different views on this paper and the recommendations. Some will say it's not perfect, some say it's not ideal. But from my perspective, it starts a discussion. I think if the value of community boards and the feedback that we receive through empathy is challenged or disagreed with, that will be proven through the consultation process and the feedback that we receive from people. But I do really tautoko the comments that Sophie has made, in the sense that if the report itself from empathy identifies that the current segments of the community do not understand or engage with the process, there is a risk that they may not understand or engage in this process in terms of providing feedback. So that does create a challenge for us. And I think that there needs to be some careful thought around how we encourage people to engage in this process and to engage with it in an open mind. And as Sophie has said, being visionary, being brave. There's a saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I at least am happy to be brave enough to say, let's challenge the status quo and look at and see what could we do better, and what does that look like. So I'll be supporting the recommendations to enable that discussion.
Councillor Buswell.
Your Worship, Councillor Elliott has had her hand up for a while.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, regardless of my feelings and understandings about the initial proposal on the table today, I'm unwilling to trigger a consultation process today. I feel that holding any limited duration public consultation in an environment with the restrictions imposed by level 4, level 3, or indeed even level 2 is unsatisfactory and will potentially alienate a large sector of our demographic. I'm also really uncomfortable that as representatives of the public, we are being seen today to be making a decision under threat, being bullied by a timeline and held under duress, and I think that is quite ironic, considering those pressures are coming from all 3 organisations that call themselves local government. I've already done a personal review of public representation, and this is not the way that I do business, so I won't be supporting today's recommendation.
Councillor Buswell.
Your Worship, I don't have Councillor Buswell. I have Councillor Randall, Councillor Halliday, Community Board Member Christine Paps, and Community Member Holly Ewens.
Didn't Councillor Buswell put the hand up? I'm not taking community board members until towards the end.
So Councillor Randall?
Yeah.
Councillor Randall, can you unmute yourself? Okay, should we try Councillor Halliday?
No,
oh,
okay, I'm here now. Hello?
Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I've listened to all the speakers today, and particularly I have to mention Holly Ewan, very impressed, and Mr. Mansell and Councillor Compton. So after listening with an open mind to all the speakers today, I will not be supporting this.
Right. Councillor Buswell.
Thank you. I guess this is just another process that's imposed on us by this time local government, which essentially is the government. And again, with really tight timeframes that are unforgiving. And I believe that today we have heard from a group of people that will be impacted, and that is obviously the community boards. And I understand that they play a really crucial part in our community. Some are well functioning and others are not and have not been in the past. Over my last few years, we've seen very, very many ups and downs of community boards and how they function within the community and so forth. In fact, in the last 6 to 8 months, we've just had 2 by-elections of community boards. So all that put aside, I think that I really do feel that it is time for a change and a time for reflection on what we're doing. And if we can somehow reach out to that community that we otherwise don't normally hear from, and Empathy Design have gone out and tried to target those groups that we don't normally hear from. And as James Coates said, you know, if we keep doing the same thing, we get the same results. So I am up for the challenge to go out to the community, to hear from them and see what they say and how they would rather engage with council. And so I'm happy for this proposal to go out for submission and get as many diverse opinions as we can, because that's what we are looking for. We are not looking to hear from the same old, because we will end up doing the same old thing. So I think it's time for a change, and fully respect what our community boards have done in the past, and look forward to what the community is wanting and how they want to express their views going forward. So I will be supporting the proposal today.
Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this has certainly been very, very interesting. The views around, it's quite interesting, you know, the views around the Waikanai ward scenario. I think it's prudent to actually suggest that the same thing could happen for Parapara Umu. You know, we seem to be very, very focused on Waikanai not being well represented through this process, but the same potentially could happen for Parapara Umu as well. I just thought that was worth mentioning. After saying that, you know, I fully agree with Councillor Compton. You know, community boards being grassroots, the grassroots connection, and how is that connection going to happen if they're not there and if wards are combined as such. But we are in a process. We have statutory requirement here, and I appreciate what's being said by other councillors with regards to time constraints, etc. But we've had all this before. I perhaps haven't been very happy, perhaps, how some of these briefings have been portrayed to us with regards to the importance of them leading into this. And I think that perhaps needs to be considered moving forward. But we're in a process, and I am very, very interested to hear what our community has to say through that consultation process, and then the hearings as well. I do want to acknowledge our community boards and the work that they do in both representing, but also in helping our communities. And I think that's a big key difference here as well, is in the helping of our communities, both those people as individuals, groups, and the community at large, which is very, very hard for a councillor to do. And also, we have different restrictions on how we can interact as well. So I will be supporting this moving forward because I'm going to adhere to the process. Although I do have reservations, but I'll be very interested to see how this plays out. On another matter, while I've got the platform, I did want to express my concerns around the Maori War Decision. Hindsight being a wonderful thing, I note that in the report there was a difficulty in engaging with iwi. I also note the issues with Te Whakaminanga o Kapiti, and although I appreciate they're being addressed, this highlights an issue in the iwi Maori space, and again I say iwi Maori space. Matawaka or non-local iwi or Māori are also supposed to be getting addressed as per our governance documents and by resolution from that 2017 decision. And I want to give voice to that now so that it's addressed as we move forward in the representational space, although I do respect that this particular process now is not the venue for this. But thank you very much.
Councillor McCann.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one of the things that we're all struggling with is this legislative process is quite specific and doesn't allow us to explore how we better a current system. It has rather given us an opportunity to look at a blank slate and what could work. So it has effectively created an us and then situation, which is, I don't think, what any of the councillors wanted to occur. So while I'll be supporting the motion as it stands, I think we have a real opportunity with the consultation that comes to hear from our communities of interest, to hear what they think and to work out what some of the finer granular detail might be. So we have an opportunity, I think, in this process, regardless of that legislation, to come out the other side and make our representation process better. But I do acknowledge that there is no one solution that councillors have all been able to sit down and say, this is the answer, because each solution comes with a downside and we have to try and weigh up which is going to work the best. So it's a very difficult challenge. And one that places a huge amount of emphasis on the next part of the process, which I think is just absolutely vital. So I hope as councillors that we're able to engage in really good discussion with our community and try and allow each side to be heard, rather than what we've seen in some debates where if people are pro or against one particular thing, they get shouted down. So I hope that we can all play a role in trying to make this ongoing discussion as civil and as helpful as possible. Thanks.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been really, really interesting today listening to the presentations given to us, plus what all my fellow councillors have talked about. Also, it's been really, really interesting hearing what our community's views are on this. So I think going through these review processes are really important to do that. But I suppose I've raised these matters during the briefings. My concern was how the research was done and how that has directed us to where we are now. And I suppose hearing the feedback from the community shows very, very strongly that the position that we are going to be voting on very shortly is overwhelmingly very different from what we're hearing from the community. And that to me indicates that the research to get us to this point has not been as robust as it should have been. Added to that, the structure that is being proposed, I do not believe is going to provide good democracy in terms of having 5 ward councillors and 5 district-wide councillors. And as was mentioned by Richard, we potentially are going to end up in a position where some communities are not going to be well represented and others will have a lot of representation. And then on top of that, you have a proposal that is hasn't included community boards. And we've heard today about all the great work that they do. And I, as a ward councillor and as a councillor, I can't see how councillors are going to continue or do all the work of 16 community board members. And I suppose I've also had situations of where, and I suppose there's been lots of conversations around how community groups are going to be, brought to the fore. But I have to say, I can give you a number of examples of where community groups have tried to work with council staff and have got absolutely nowhere. They bring it to an elected member and then it gets dealt with. And so that is not providing a voice to the communities. It's actually disempowering them, even if a proposal of these community groups is put forward. I suppose added to this, we're in a situation of where we're in lockdown. That may well continue. There are a lot of community people in the community who will struggle to get the information in the first instance, and they all struggle to provide feedback. So I am not happy with this proposal going forward today, so I will not be voting for it. Thank you.
Right, that's all the councillors have spoken. I'm going to give the 2 community board chairs who are here a chance to say something short, brief. Chris Pepps.
Mine isn't actually that short and brief because I was advised not to put this forward in public speaking time, to keep it until now. So can you bear with me while I read? So it'll probably take about 3 minutes.
Yep.
Okay then. Okay. As an elected member like yourselves and as the chair of the Aotearoa Community Board, I'm joining with the members of my board and I believe all the other community board members of the Kapiti Coast District Council in stating that we are unequivocally opposed to the proposed restructure that has come out of this present review. While we agree that no model is perfect and improvements could be made to the existing system, this proposal is a backward step for Aotearoa and Kapiti. We're convinced the initial consultation was poor and certain the interpretation was flawed. This has led to a poor proposal which we're certain will give a very poor outcome for Aotearoa and the rest of Kapiti. Aotearoa residents often tell us they feel that they are forgotten when council decisions are being made. Whether or not this is true, they feel that in most cases the community board is the only link or voice they have at the council table. Most believe we have a good councillor who promotes Aotearoa, but they also believe Aotearoa needs the extra voices of the community board and that the board members are more accessible. We and many of the people we have spoken to about the proposed change have the firm belief that if the Aotearoa Community Board is lost, then Aotearoa will be left behind in many decisions. Councillors don't see the work the boards do in their areas, but believe me, if it was to fall upon one councillor, they would not be able to cope with the extra workload. To suggest, as the proposal does, that the community groups or volunteers can do or will do this is laughable. Some councillors, certainly the newer ones, believe the boards contribute little. Former councils and councillors recognise the boards and contributions. The Mayor's election platform, based on local government New Zealand initiatives, even proposed finding ways to give more delegated powers and opportunities to boards to represent their areas more effectively. He seems to have given these ideas away. Let me give you a brief rundown of the few things our board has worked on and things we have achieved. Over the 8 years I've been on the board, we've been instrumental in bus services being added to the timetable, more bus shelters, a change of route to make it easier for locals to get to bus, extended the bus service to travel to Paraparaumu in the mornings and to collect at a time that suits our people to go there to shop. When the train service was extended to Waikanai, the bus to Paraparaumu stopped and passengers had to alight at Waikanai, get on a train, then run the gauntlet of the Coastlands car park. Most of these passengers were elderly and not that steady on their feet. The service was reinstated after the community board petitioned Greater Wellington and the bus company. Board members attend a variety of meetings in the community. If the board is removed, then various groups will have to change their deeds or constitutions. The Otaki Museum actually has a requirement in their trust deed for a board member to be on the committee. The PB2O Community Liaison Group has a legal requirement that a community board member be on this group as well. We also support the food bank and important community network groups, which provide the opportunity for all providers in our town to network as well as Otaki health and wellbeing. The board was instrumental in the extension of the traffic sitting lane on State Highway 1 out of Wairinga Road. This was a very dangerous intersection. The board was in constant contact with NZTA until they finally lengthened the lane, and the intersection is now far easier and safer to negotiate when heading south. There's plenty more we could add. Although as councillors you may not see the work the board members do in their areas, it does not mean we are doing nothing. We are busy working behind the scenes, actually making your job easier. We don't blow our own trumpet every time we accomplish something. We're happy in the knowledge that we have helped our community. 2 more paragraphs. A cynic might suggest we're concerned about our positions and our roles. We're certainly not in this for the money. What is proposed will not provide a better service or solution for the ratepayers and voters of Otaki and Kapiti. And finally, wouldn't a wise council vote for the status quo when doing the review until the minister announces her own review and restructure? Thank you very much for listening to me.
Paul Ewan.
There's no doubt that community boards offer the flax roots voices for councillors and for councils. But this proposal threatens to uproot a pāharakike and plant one taller tree with untenable roots and expect it to do a better job. I think that's questionable. I think councillors have based their decision on a research document that at its best is vague, at its very best is vague. And it's questionable, as a lot of questionable assumptions that still can't be answered. And I don't have any evidence that the Paikakariki community has even played a part in engaged into that research at all. And I'd just like to bring up some transparency and predetermination. And I'd like reassurance from councillors that this restructuring, this proposal that's going out to restructure, wasn't just predetermined by having some difficult community boards. I say this is one of the apparently high functioning and outstanding community boards. Because if it is, say it, be transparent about that and the impact of that. And I would say to you as councillors, then that's and the mayor, that's a governance issue. That's not an operational issue. That's if you've had problems with community boards not performing or needing the extra support, then why haven't you tried to fix that before reshuffling? Okay, that's a really basic fundamental point. And all through the recommendations and the briefings you've got, you're giving a ward councillor, you're wrapping around all the support. All that support has never been offered to community boards. Why not look at going, okay, our community boards are needing support in order to execute their functions. Offering the community boards that support before taking it away and giving it to one single entity, well, in Paikakariki, I don't know how that one ward councillor is going to do. You would have seen what I've sent you. We have interactions with some 30 clubs and groups. We sit as members between us on over 12 groups. That's going to regular meetings. That's just in Paikakariki. How is a ward councillor? We have actual real concerns that that workload isn't reasonable for anybody. And yeah, we won't be supporting this proposal. We think it's based on flawed assumptions. Not that we have voting rights, but hey.
Kathy.
I'd just like to support and agree with what the other community board chairs have said, but I'd also like to point out that number 60 on the report, personally, I find that insulting. Our community board have been out and about in the community, enabling communities the whole time. Council spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the Martin Jenkins report. The 3 recommendations there to help and support community boards, and what's happened? Nothing. That's all I have to say.
Right. I think I write a reply. Look, in terms of the process that we've been through, this is a benchmark process. We are at a point where we want to engage with the public. A lot of the debates that we've had are suitable for going through the submission process. Some of our councillors have said, these are challenging times. What the issue has done is put forward a challenge to us in terms of what the status quo is, how complacent we are in the status quo. And I can tell you that the throwaway comment by Chris Betts that I've been advocating for greater powering of community boards, but I've thrown away that idea, is far from the truth. The challenge was issued to them to start engaging on this process, and that still stands. So looking forward to the consultation process that's coming ahead, it's critical that that's where the decision is going to be made. We, as elected members, have discussed this. We have workshopped this, we've gone through briefings, but we haven't put this out into the public marketplace. That's critical. I have total confidence that going through the public consultation process is the true exercising of the democratic process. If you say we stop now, 1, you stuff up the process. 2, you're saying that you've got no confidence in the public consultation process and grassroots democracy for us to go out there and consult people. Irrespective of my own personal views, I want to be able to say, look, like other councillors, this is what is proposed. What are your ideas? How can you challenge? If the methodology is crap, say it is, challenge it. And therefore, we need to have the guts to go to the public. Otherwise, what's the point of us being elected representatives? So on that basis, now I will now put the vote recommendations 1 to 5 as the amended version.
Your Worship, before you do that, I have Councillor Coots that is requesting to speak.
Didn't I? Oh, I thought you already spoke.
Your Worship, I just proposed an amendment which I'd sent through to Dem Services and through to yourself. I appreciate you may not have seen it. A very simple amendment, and it was proposed to add Councillor Hanford as an additional member to the drafting group. I think she would bring a extremely valuable skill set and experience to that group around community engagement and consultation, a strong youth perspective, and potentially an ability to reach some of those sectors that we may struggle to reach. So with the permission of the mover and the seconder, I'd like just to propose adding her to the existing group, but no furthermore.
I accept that. Angela, you okay with that? So with that addition to that, Councillor Hanford's name to the panel, I've now put the recommendations 1 to 5, moved by Mayor Guru, seconded by Councillor Buswell, to the vote. All those, I'm just checking how to do this.
So, Your Worship, I can see that we currently have 3 yes votes, 4 yes votes, 3.
Hold on. You just go through them. The green, which button did you press? The green button for the yes?
Green tick for yes, cross for no. I'm sorry, who?
Mr. Mayor, we have a request for a division.
Yep, but have the voting taken place?
Just going through. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
7 should be.
Yeah. We have 3 votes against. and 7 votes in favour.
So one missing.
Councillor Pravanov has requested a division. So it's 7 in favour, 3 against, and a request for a division.
The division is easy to, because it's all marked, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So
the motion, the recommendations are carried.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Shall we go on to the next one, or do you want a break? We should have a break, eh?
Yes.
Councillors, do you want a break? Yeah, everybody. 5-minute break. Thank you.
Grayson?
Yes.
Do we, just with that division, I can't see. Okay.